air in the glass room was thick and hot now, a stark contrast to the house's usual climate-controlled chill. It was 2:15 Julian's thumb had left her wrist, but the ghost of his touch lingered like a brand. Chloe Atherton, CEO of 1,000 Sleepless Nights, was breathing shallowly, her eyes fixed on his. She didn't move to hide the photo he'd exposed, the blurry, devastating Polaroid of her mother's accident scene. It rested between them, the raw truth that money couldn't buy away. To the archives, she had whispered, the sound cracking the perfect silence. Find out what's on tape 27 that the crash report covered up. And don't you dare get caught. Julian let his gaze linger over her face, the fierce intelligence, the bone-deep weariness, the startling, terrifying vulnerability she showed only to him, the man paid to be invisible. He was no longer just the cleaner. He was her accomplice, her shield, her forbidden truth. Archives, Ms. Atherton, Julian confirmed, his voice deeper than usual. Where exactly? And what is the official story I need to be ready to counter? She walked around the desk slowly, her motion a study in contained tension. She stopped beside him, her hip brushing his arm, an accidental contact that felt like a deliberate fuse being lit. The location is a stone farmhouse in upstate New York. It was my mother's retreat. The card you saw, the high security one, is keyed to the main gate. The archives are in the library's basement vault. The official story is a faulty axle and driver error. My father paid millions to ensure that version was the only one that existed. Julian felt a familiar rush of cold fury, not at the rich, but at the absolute impunity of wealth. He had cleaned up messes his whole life, but never one this monumental, this deadly. And the tape, he asked, deliberately turning his head so that his temple rested inches from her hair. He caught the scent of her expensive shampoo, a faint floral note fighting the cold air. Chloe closed her eyes again, and a shiver ran through her, deeper than before. The tape is the sound, the last 30 seconds. I've been reconstructing the physics of the impact against the timeline of the recording. The calculations don't match. Something else was there, something that shouldn't have been. You think the answer is physical proof, hidden in an antique farmhouse instead of digital. My father erased the digital world. He can't erase the objects he didn't know existed. She opened her eyes, their blue intensity piercing him. You'll need to fly commercial. Cash only. You'll leave the estate through the service tunnel in 2 hours. I've already disabled the perimeter sensors on the north fence. It will look like a routine maintenance glitch on the staff log. Julian's jaw tightened. You've thought of everything but the most obvious detail. Is how you plan to survive a week here without me. The question was intimate, a demand for her to admit her dependency. She didn't miss a beat. I will survive the way I always do, by calculating the risk of every breath. Now, go pack the satchel. I need the key card back. Julian waited, letting the silence stretch again, demanding the price of her trust. She finally reached into the hidden drawer, retrieving the sleek, heavy card. Their fingers brushed as the exchange was made. This time, the contact was longer, deliberate, an almost punishing friction of skin against skin. The tension in the room coiled tighter, almost unbearable. "Fail me, Julian," she murmured, her voice laced with desperation that was more seductive than any demand. "I won't fail you," he promised, his eyes dark, holding her stare until she was forced to look away first. He turned and walked out, his blood thrumming with adrenaline and something hotter, something dangerous. Julian had 2 hours. He was packing in his small, meticulously tidy staff quarters, his internal monologue a frenzied echo chamber of risk and desire. He slipped the Atherton Archives key card into a concealed pocket in his travel jacket. He was doing this for money, for the thrill, but mostly, he was doing it for her. He was drawn to her weakness, to the broken girl hiding behind the Ice Queen's diamond-cut facade. He wanted to be the one to finally crack the code of her heart, not just her crime. He needed a final brief from her, a last-minute detail that couldn't be texted or emailed. He moved silently through the service hallways toward her private kitchen entrance, the only spot not covered by the estate's main camera array. He found her there, not drinking coffee, but staring into the industrial-sized stainless steel freezer, holding a glass of iced water. "Ms. Atherton," he whispered, his voice startling in the confined space. She spun around, nearly dropping the glass. The panic was real this time. "God, Julian, I told you acoustically minimized. I need to know what I'm looking for in the vault. Not just proof of a lie. Proof of a person who lied. A file, a signature, a name." She moved toward him, her desperation overriding caution. She leaned in, her body language completely different from the controlled CEO. She was frantic, her voice barely audible. "There was a man, my father's protege, Elias Thorne. He was in the car with my mother. He survived. The report says he was unconscious, medically cleared. But he was the one who was supposed to be driving. He vanished a week after the funeral. Check the financial logs in the vault. Find his contract. Find what my father paid him to disappear, and stay silent." Breath was warm against his ear, his neck. The intimacy of sharing such a deadly secret in the dark, restricted space of the kitchen was overwhelming. Julian could feel the erratic beat of her heart, and his own pulse hammered in response. He reached up, ostensibly to brush a strand of hair from her face, but his fingers trailed across the curve of her jaw, his touch electric, demanding. "You're sending me to find evidence that could destroy your family's entire legacy, ruin your company, and land the Atherton name in prison. You're trusting me, the housekeeper, with this. Trusting the only person in this house not owned by my father's lies," she countered, her voice catching. She leaned closer still, a silent, desperate acknowledgement of their dangerous, magnetic proximity. "Don't come back without it." Julian let his hand drop, the contact too much, too soon. The heat was almost suffocating. 2 hours, North Fence. I'll send a coded message when I have the file. Hours later, Julian was outside the gilded cage. He had moved through the service tunnel like a shadow, the staff ID key card granting his final, unauthorized exit. He was on a midnight flight, staring out the tiny window at the patchwork of lights below, each one a different life, a different secret. His life was now split in two, the efficient, silent Julian who polished marble, and the reckless, driven Julian who was chasing a ghost for the woman who saw him only when she needed a cleanup crew. He closed his eyes and saw the flash of Chloe's blue eyes in the dark kitchen. The risk was enormous. His visa, his livelihood, his freedom. But the reward wasn't the money she was paying him. It was the thrill of seeing her true self, the desperate desire to be the only person she relied on. He realized he wasn't just attracted to her. He was obsessed with the idea of being the one to finally save her from her own perfection. The farmhouse was desolate, exactly as she described. A lonely sentinel on a frost-covered landscape. The Atherton key card silenced the perimeter alarms, a satisfying click in the dead of night. The archive vault in the basement was cold, smelling of mildew and old paper. The walls were lined with heavy, steel filing cabinets. Julian moved with the efficiency of a Marine, pulling on the memory of the equations he had erased. The filing system was based on chronology and physics reports, not names. He knew where to look. He found the file he was looking for in a steel drawer marked Internal Review. Liability and Asset Reappraisal 2005. The label was a corporate lie designed to hide its truth. Inside, he found what he was looking for. Elias Thorne's personnel file. It contained a signed affidavit, a resignation, and a single explosive document, a non-disclosure and severance agreement for $50 million, paid out a week after the crash. Thorne's signature was shaky, but undeniable, and taped to the back of that document was a small, sealed envelope labeled Proof of Contact, Insurance. Julian tore it open. Inside was a smaller, older cassette tape labeled with a single, handwritten word, Alibi. Pulled a small, battery-powered tape recorder from his satchel, a cheap, analog device he'd picked up at a late-night convenience store. He pressed the ancient play button. The tape hissed, then a familiar sound filled the silent vault, the sound of a child's laughter. Chloe's mother's voice. The familiar lead-up to the crash, then the crash. The sickening metal, the splintering glass. But this tape didn't end in silence. After the chaos, there was a sharp, clear sound of a second voice. Not Thorne and not a doctor's. A man's voice speaking on a phone, low and urgent. The car is totaled. The primary target is confirmed dead. Secondary target is stable. The tape is secured. It looks exactly like the setup we planned. Julian froze, the blood draining from his face. The secondary target, was a 7-year-old Chloe. And the voice sounded familiar. It was deep, authoritative, and utterly devoid of remorse. It was her father's voice. The tape clicked off. Julian leaned against the cold steel cabinet, his mind reeling. This wasn't a cover-up for a technical malfunction. This was a sophisticated, high-stakes assassination orchestrated by the man who then became her guardian, her mentor, and the architect of the prison she lived in. He looked down at the file and the tape. He had the proof. He had the weapon that would free her, but also the weapon that would utterly destroy her. He thought of her blue eyes in the dark kitchen, trusting him, vulnerable. He thought of the fire that burned between them, fueled by this forbidden secret. He pulled out his burner phone, the one Chloe had given him, and keyed in the coded message. The cage is bigger than we thought, but I have the key. Knew the moment he pressed send, his life and hers would never be silent again. He wasn't just her cleaner, he was her co-conspirator, and his reward was no longer a paycheck, but a life irrevocably entangled with the dangerous, beautiful mess he was about to unleash.